Okay, so today's video is going to be about repurposing tomato plants that don't necessarily develop. And this is a thinning process you can use when you're growing a lot of tomatoes like I do in one pot. So, for example, when I start my tomatoes, I only start with 4 seeds. That gives me a 25% chance of one of those plants being successful. So if I plant 4 seeds of tomatoes in 1 cube and all 4 lived, well, I have 4 extra plants to work with in the future. I can either thin them out, pluck them out, or I could leave them in there and let them grow and see which ones become the dominant plant within that pot, for example. So, and then you might get a case where only 1 plant lives, and that's where suckering comes in and using donors and things like that. But what we're doing is we're going to thin our plants, but we're not necessarily wasting the plant. So the purpose of doing this is it creates more opportunity for the plants that are already doing good, like these are doing really good right here, and we want them to do even better. So by thinning the plants out of there, you give the pot more priority, more dominance for this plant to fully take over that pot and continue on growing even more. So it does allow the plant to grow even more healthy. So we're going to take one of these plants out of here. So generally what I do is I go down below, like you see here. And I've done it to a number of plants already, but I figured, you know what, let me run through this video and show this on video so I can show you one of the methods I use to multiply my plants. Like this year I want to grow enough of each one of these varieties of plants so I have some tomatoes. Some of them are successfully propagating and growing and fruiting. Some of them aren't. Some of them are getting bacterial wilt, tomato wilt, blight. It's too densely planted, so it's getting root bound. And I didn't plan for this to happen in this case because I'm selling my house originally, and I thought the house would sell relatively pretty quickly, and I would be able to, you know, remove these pots and take them with me. And it turned out that that's not the case. And now these plants are 6-7 feet tall, and I'm not moving them without absolutely destroying my tomato plant. So that's not an option anymore. So my option now is to stay here growing and to multiply my tomato production. Now, because of the reason that it's overplanted, it's beginning to develop diseases, and it's becoming root bound in the soil. I mean, this soil is so completely filled with roots. The roots actually grew into my spinach pot right here, and the roots from the tomatoes filled this whole pot up with tomato roots, and now my spinach is dying. So, I mean, the plants are literally taking over this area completely, absolutely out of control. And again, I wouldn't normally plant like this, though I do like the effect I'm getting. I don't normally recommend or even want to grow like this. And so because of this reason that it's already here and it's established, I can't move them. I have to thin them out. So by thinning them out, I'm not wasting the hard-earned energy I put into growing this plant and all the energy I started with starting the seeds and everything. I just simply need to cut off some of the plants that I don't want in here anymore, thin it out, and then reroot that plant. Now, that's basically what we're going to do in this video. And that'll also give me an opportunity to not only spread my risk out from plant disease, but it also spreads out that particular variety to produce more fruit in a different location. So it gives me opportunity to experiment a little bit with different areas of the yard where they may do better, you know. You see that? I'm getting late blight in here. So they may do better in some areas better than others. And that really, I mean, you can move your plants over 10 feet into one part of your yard, and you'll see they'll explode in growth, or you move them 10 feet over to another part of your yard, and they all die. It's really crazy like that. So the only real way to know what the most effective areas are is to grow in different areas of your yard or your property, and then find out where the best area is, at least for that particular variety. All right, so enough chattering with that. Let's move on with what plant are we going to cull out of our herd over here. And I did select this plant here because it's not too big, and there's only 1 plant left in that pot over here. One of them did get sick and die, so I definitely want to spread my risk out, because I already lost 1 or 2 plants out of that pot back here. And that is the white tomato. And there is some kind of a disease developed, and it needs to come out. And then we'll just leave this one plant here, which is already, 6 feet tall with tomatoes on it. So we'll leave that one alone. We'll take this one out of here, and we're going to root it now. So basically what I do is I take my handy dandy trusty scissors. You always have a set of scissors in your greenhouse, guys, because you're always clipping stuff. And make sure you wash them off, or keep a little container with bleach in it, pretty concentrated thing of bleach or hydrogen. I recommend bleach, and just have that scissor tip stored in the bleach like that. And whenever you need it, you just take it out, wipe it down, or rinse it, and then cut your plants or do whatever kind of pruning you're going to do, and you're done. That way you prevent the infection from spreading. So we're going to propagate this plant. And generally what I do, there's 2 ways I can do this. I can either cut it all the way down at the root base, so it dies quickly and this plant can really take off. Or I'll cut it I'll leave like 2 leaves on it, and I'll cut it and take off the upper half. It's almost like suckering your tomato, but you're doing a little more than suckering, because you're taking off 90% of the plant and you're just leaving the base down there. So there's a couple ways to do it, but in a case like this plant really isn't going to grow. There's so much shading around this plant, it's not going to grow anyway. So it's best for me to just completely remove this plant. So what I'm going to do, and there's already a root coming out down at the bottom. I want to take advantage of that. I'm going to stick it kind of in the soil here and just kind of get some of those roots out of there as well. I want to get as much of that out as possible. See, there's some roots. See, now I can also examine these roots as well. I don't like the looks of that. I'm hoping he possibly picking up an infection. So, okay, so whenever you cut your plants, you always want to inspect for possible diseases. Now, I don't like some of the looks of what I see down here. I'm seeing some of the roots look brown and are slightly rotten. I'm not sure if that's turning brown on the inside. You know what we're going to do? We're just going to remove all of this material off of here. We're going to take off from here up, and then again inspect the inside of the stem. See how it's nice and green and even through the middle? There's no disease on it. That's what you want to see. You don't want any possibility of that rooting system that you just removed to have any disease. So you're going to take off 1, 2 leaves like that, which is good enough. Don't worry about taking off these little stems on here. That's nothing to worry about. And then we're just going to basically take this and stick it in our water container over here, if you can. It's hard to do this one-handed, folks, so you got to have some patience with me. And get it in there. And don't worry about it being long and strangly, and it'll find its way. It'll root up again. And so you can see I got another one here. And then what we'll do, I'm not going to do it on camera because it's too difficult for me to film and do all of this with one hand. It's virtually impossible. What we'll do is we'll write out a tag on a piece of tape, write what it is, and we'll tie it around the base of the stem of the plant. And that's it. We'll leave it until it roots. Once it gets rooted, it'll get potted in new soil, new pots that are been sanitized, and then we'll end up with something like this, just like you would with a sucker. But it's going to be a little longer down there because you're going to have a whole stem filled up with nice, fresh white roots. Now, once you plant this in your pot and you get it in there, make sure you keep it watered more than normal. Then you're going to water it normally. Normally, you're not going to water it like 3 times a day and make sure it's soaked. The reason why you want to do that is you're transitioning the plant from being in water, as you rooted it, into being more dry into the soil. So it needs to adapt slowly. And you'll know where that point is once the plant doesn't show any signs of wilt when it goes into sunlight. All right, so once it starts getting strong and you see growth coming out of it and it looks nice and green and everything, it'll begin to it'll begin to hold its firmness in the sunlight. So, you know, once you put it into the soil, it's probably going to want to wilt and everything like that. Like this is another one back here I did, Talakalua, and I also did the pineapple. No, purple calabash. The purple calabash is showing signs it's showing signs of a blossom end rot, and it's also one of the plants died from a bacterial wilt. So hopefully this cutting that I started doesn't have the bacterial wilt in it yet, because this is from the top of the plant and I removed the rest. So it did root. It is looking good. I just don't know if it carried the disease all the way through the lymph system of the plant. Sometimes it doesn't get up high enough. You can get away with rooting it and then being successfully growing it back out. So we'll see how this one goes. Hopefully it didn't get diseased and I'll be able to continue on. So after that stage, after about 2.5 weeks, you should expect to see something. If I can get in here, there's so many plants growing now. Your plant should look like this in about 2.5 weeks. Now this plant was very, very small about a week and a half ago or a week ago. And this is about 2.5 weeks old now. This was started basically, it took about a week for it to root, put it in soil, watered it for about, regular for about 3 days or so, and then it grew, it started growing, it started showing signs of growth, and I took it out of the shade into more direct sunlight because it was able to withstand the sunlight. You don't want to keep it in direct sunlight when you first start the rooting system because it needs to be able to establish. So you're going to harden the plant off by slowly introducing it into direct sunlight, keep it more and more into sunlight. Like I moved it from that corner away from the shading of the other plants into more light, and then I just moved it into direct light. So I kind of hardened it off, so to speak. And now the plant is growing absolutely good. The color of the leaves is very beautiful, and this was pretty much propagated the same way I just showed you at top. Now this is not suckering, this is actually thinning your plants, but we're going to root the thinned plants to get more plants out of that particular variety. So we have redundancy. You want redundancy when it comes to growing tomatoes, because with tomatoes you're susceptible to so many diseases that your crops could completely fail in 5 other areas of your garden, and yet you might have one of these suckers that you, or plants that you thinned out and you rooted and you put it in another part of your yard, and it gives you all of the tomatoes that year from that variety, and all the rest of them got wiped out from diseases. So you really need the redundancy when you grow these plants. Yes, I like to grow, give and take, anywhere between 4 to 12 plants of each variety. And that is because of that reason, is the redundancy. I might find that 8 of those plants died out of the 12 that I started and give me almost no fruit, or the fruit rotted, whereas the other few that are left produce more fruit than all of those plants would have produced combined, because they were healthy and they didn't get diseased. So that's why I do that. Also, too, keep in mind, this is not like saying, hell, well, if you're going to grow 12 plants, well, just start 12 seeds and grow those 12 seeds out and you'll have your 12 plants. No, it's not the same thing, guys. What happens when you cut a plant down and it re-roots, it puts out a new root system, leaving behind all the old soil that may have been contaminated with bad fungals, and now you got new soil that's healthy and you're putting it into a new soil. Plus, you got to keep in mind that the shoot that you cut and you propagated, it's already established. When you start from seed, you got to wait a while. It takes time for that plant to reach 3-4 feet before it starts making flowers, and the heat of the sun might slow it down, and there's all these problems when you start from seed. But when you start from, like I'm showing you, either suckering your plants or going by donors, or suckering, or doing this system by thinning out your plants and re-rooting those thinned out plants, you'll see that these plants will grow relatively pretty quickly, and you'll get tomato and fruit most likely within a month. This is only about 2.5 weeks, so you're probably talking within the next week and a half to 2 weeks. I should already see this big enough where I should see flowers on it, and then fruit will soon follow. And fruit take about a month from the time it's a little fruit to ripening with tomatoes. Most tomatoes, these smaller tomatoes, they will. Larger tomatoes, no, they can take several months to ripen. So, plus the temperature's got to be right. It won't ripen unless the temperatures start reaching 80 degrees at certain points. There are all kinds of little factors in it, but that's why I am doing what I'm doing, and that's why I don't just thin my tomato plants out and chuck them. every one of my tomato plants I thin, and if it does, unless it looks diseased, if it's diseased, I chuck them. But if it's not diseased, then I do this with them, and then I spread them out in different areas of my yard. I'll put them in pots. Man, it's getting harder and harder to move around in here. I'll put them in pots like this. All right. I prefer a little bit smaller of a pot, but this is all I got at this point. I used all my half-gallon pots and stuff, so I got to go with these 1.5 gallons. I'll put them in these pots, and then I'll take these and I'll find a part of my yard where I can put the pot and bury the pot at least up to here into the soil, loosen up all the soil around it so the roots can get past these holes and then grow down into that lower area. I don't have to worry about it getting bogged down. It eliminates a lot of insects that like to burrow through the soil and to get into your pot. It protects your plant. This part stays above ground, so you don't have to worry about excessive rain. Like in my yard, I'm on a hill, so we get water where it floods all the way down my yard. And if your plants are planted directly into the soil and that plant is sitting in that water, it causes a lot of problems. This does help by raising that whole plant, where the plant meets the soil and raises it above the ground. This reduces a lot of problems. So just bury it like 2 inches into the soil, you're good, and then let the plant grow its roots down into the bottom. That way it doesn't get root bound. And that's the way I like to split up my tomatoes, and believe it or not, it works really well, and I can really double or triple my crop. Now, later in the season, this is already third week in July, so we got maybe, like later in the season, going into October, or like now, it's like the third week of July. It's pretty much midsummer. I really need to do whatever suckering I'm going to do now, because even though it's going to take a month for the plant to go from cutting it and putting it in water to the point where it fruits is going to take a month. So by the end, like in my case, by the end of August, I want to make sure I've at least got green tomatoes on my plant, because after that, any tomatoes that do come off are going to generally either be smaller or they're not going to reach maturity because winter sets in here pretty early. All right, so timing is important. If you see that your plants are well developed and you can do your suckering on your plants and increase your yield of plants of that variety that way, do that. And also you can do it this way by thinning out the plants in your pot and utilizing those resources as well to increase your yield on that particular variety. So, I mean, it looks like I don't have a lot going, but I'll have more going by the end of the year. I can actually double what you see here simply by what I'm showing you here. All right? So that's how I thin out tomato plants once they get bigger, and I regrow them. And give it a try. If you have any success with it, comment below. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.